bright, or lights flare as a nurse yanks my arm, whispering danger while pretending nothing is wrong. I freeze mid-step, unable to understand why her fingers keep tightening around my sleeve, as if she's bracing herself against something she can't name aloud. "Don't stand there," she mutters. Her lips barely moving, eyes locked on the surgical glare bouncing from the overhead lamps. The beams slice across the room in clean, merciless lines, turning every stainless steel surface into a sharp reflection that feels too bright, too watchful. I pull back slightly, my voice cracking in a low whisper. "What's happening?" She shakes her head once, quick and small, the kind of gesture meant to end questions rather than start them. Her other hand trembles as she adjusts a drape on a nearby cart, acting out a routine task that doesn't match the tension etched in her jaw. "Move," she murmurs, "just move like you belong here." The command lands oddly, but I obey, stepping farther into the OR as the doors seal behind me with a soft hiss. A shadow passes near the far corner, though no one stands there when I look directly. My chest tightens. The surgical glare sharpens everything, edges of instruments, outlines of carts, even the deepened lines around the nurse's eyes. Nothing in the room is chaotic, yet nothing feels right. Staff drift around me with measured precision, each motion performed with a smoothness bordering on rehearsed. A floating nurse adjusts a saline bag without glancing up. A tech wipes down a tray that doesn't seem to have been used. Their movements are slow, controlled, almost ceremonial. It's like they've been instructed to behave normally, but don't remember what normal is supposed to look like. I whisper to the closest person, "Where's the attending?" "Why is this room set up?" No reply. Just a sideways glance that lasts half a second too long before snapping back to the task at hand. The silence in the OR vibrates under the lights, heavy enough to make my pulse stutter. I take a deep breath, forcing my voice steady. "Someone tell me what's going on." The nurse who pulled me in steps closer, her face pale beneath the glare. "Don't ask that. Not here." Her voice barely exists, a thin thread stretched too tight. She straightens a stack of towels with hands that keep missing the edges by a fraction of an inch. "You walked in at the wrong time," she says, but the way she says wrong feels like a warning. Why I ask? She exhales shakily, forcing a neutral expression as another nurse passes by. "Because someone planned this room for a case that doesn't exist." My stomach drops. "What case?" "Not mine to say." She leans forward, eyes flicking to the OR doors, then back to me. "Pretend you're here for supply check." "Don't stand still." "Don't look scared." My mouth goes dry. Why would I be scared? Her answer is immediate, almost reflexive. "Because he doesn't like surprises." The pronoun burns. "He." My mind races. "Who?" Her jaw clenches. "You know who." The surgical glare splits across her cheekbones, carving stark shadows that make her expression even tighter. She steps away abruptly as footsteps echo from the hallway outside. A tech wheels in a cart expression, blank eyes down. No one acknowledges me now. It's as if the room collectively agreed to pretend I'm part of the setup. I try to mimic their movements, touching a gown packet, shifting a monitor cord, anything to look occupied. But the weight of their avoidance presses hard against my ribs. In the reflection of a steel cabinet, I catch sight of my own face, wide-eyed, tight-lipped, too alert. The nurse appears behind me again, close enough that her breath brushes my ear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispers. Someone arranged this. Someone who expected you to walk in alone. My hands shake. What do you mean, arranged? Don't make me say it. Not with cameras rolling. Not with people listening. She steps away, assuming her position beside a tray posture rigid. Her voice returns to a professional tone as she says, "Can you check the count on those sponges?" It's a disguise of a question, a verbal shield, something she hopes the others will accept at face value. I nod, moving mechanically toward the tray, pretending to count while my thoughts spiral. My husband's name beats at the edges of my mind even before I try to suppress it. He has access, authority, influence. He could arrange a setup, control a schedule, manipulate a room. But why? Why here? Why now? And why would a nurse, someone who barely knows me, be terrified enough to warn me? I glance over my shoulder. The nurse watches me, eyes wide, fear carved deep. She mouths one word, hide. My heart stops cold. I scan the room for somewhere inconspicuous behind the supply cart near the anesthesia alcove, anywhere the surgical glare doesn't strike directly, but every shadow feels too exposed. The sense of being watched creeps along my spine. I whisper, "Tell me what he did." She shakes her head fiercely, lips barely moving. "Not here." The OR doors shift slightly as someone pushes against them from the hallway. Everyone in the room stills. The silence turns sharp brittle. Someone is about to walk in, someone none of them want to face. The nurse steps closer to me again, her voice trembling now. "You need to figure out how to leave. Quietly. Before he sees you. Her eyes flash. Don't say it. The surgical glare burns across the center of the room, illuminating everything in stark white. I can feel something dreadful building behind the unopened doors, a presence I can't see yet, but already recognize. And all I can think, all I can hear, beneath the hum of vents and the squeak of sterile shoes is the warning still vibrating in my bones. Someone set this up. Someone expects me. And I'm already too far inside to pretend I don't understand who. I'm Lauren Hale, 34, a surgical technologist from Seattle, Washington, and hours before that moment in the OR, I had convinced myself the shift would end without anything unusual. I'd been wrong before, but never in a way that made the air feel tight around my ribs. I remember clocking out, letting the familiar beep of my badge fall into the background noise of late afternoon chatter as staff packed up to leave. My shoulders felt heavy from the week, but nothing about the hallway at that moment warned me that my world was about to crack open. As I stepped into the break room to grab my lunch container, the first strange detail waited quietly on the wall, a single yellow sticky note slightly curled at one edge. At first glance, it looked normal, so ordinary that I almost ignored it. But the closer I got, the more it pulled at me. It was blank. Completely blank. No message, no doodle, not even an initial. Just faint pressure marks like someone had pressed a pen to the paper without writing anything. A small angled scratch cut through the top right corner, thin but deliberate. I reached up and touched it with the pad of my finger. It felt colder than it should have, as if the paper had been placed there recently. I didn't know then that it would become the first object I'd associate with the spiral that followed, but something about it lodged in my mind like a tiny splinter. I stepped back, trying to shake off the uneasy flicker crawling across my skin. A silence gap flickers between steps. The thought came uninvited, almost like a whisper threading itself into the background. I blinked, unsure if I'd actually heard something or if my nerves were inventing meaning where none existed. The room felt too still, like the fluorescent lights hummed louder than usual. I shook my head, forcing myself to drop the sticky note from my thoughts. Long shifts made people see patterns in nothing. I'd always prided myself on not doing that, on being the calm, rational one. But as I walked out into the hallway, the image of that blank note clung to me like static. The corridor outside the break room was busier than usual, bodies moving in rushed lines, people talking in clipped tones. I caught the sound of someone laughing too loudly near the elevators, a brittle edge to it that didn't match the expression on their face. Everything felt slightly off-tempo, like the whole unit was half a beat out of rhythm. I spotted Emma moving through the hall with her shoulders hunched and her gaze locked on the floor. She usually said hi even on her worst days, but today she didn't notice me or she pretended not to. Her walk was quick, not hurried, but tight, like she was trying to be invisible. She cut a glance over her shoulder with such sharp anxiety that it scraped across my nerves, a stolen glance too deliberate to be accidental. I called her name, but she didn't stop. She only pressed her lips together and continued toward the OR wing. The unease tugged harder now. I followed slowly, my steps softer than normal, as if instinct warned me not to make noise. A silence gap flickers between steps. Again, the phrase pulsed through me, and this time I felt it as much as I heard it. Something was wrong, subtle, invisible, but present. I reached the corner where the OR wing opened into a brighter corridor. The doors stood closed except for one slightly ajar. OR 3. My breath caught without reason I could explain. Or doors did not stay open unattended. Protocol demanded they remain sealed unless in active use or under supervision. I approached cautiously, reaching out to nudge the door just enough to see if the hinge had loosened. Before my fingers touched it, someone inside moved past the gap too quick for me to see their face, but slow enough for me to register that they hadn't meant to be seen. I stepped back, heart thudding. This wasn't paranoia. This was someone breaking procedure in a department where breaking procedure meant consequences. I told myself to walk away. I wasn't on shift anymore. I wasn't responsible. But the sticky note scratched at my thoughts again, its blankness suddenly heavy with implication I didn't yet understand. If someone needed to communicate quietly without leaving obvious traces, an empty note could mean everything. Or nothing. The problem was not knowing which. I forced myself to breathe, reset my thoughts, act normal. But as soon as I turned to, residents walked by speaking under their breath about changes to the schedule that hadn't been finalized. One muttered something about an attending making strange requests. The other told him to keep his voice down. Their voices dipped, but the tension didn't. I walked past them pretending not to hear, but their narrowed eyes followed me. I didn't like the feeling. I found myself drifting back toward the break room again, as if returning to the scene of the first wrong detail might help me make sense of the rest. The sticky note remained on the wall, still crooked, still blank. A hollow pressure expanded beneath my ribs. I reached up again and tapped the paper lightly. This time I felt the subtle tackiness of adhesive that hadn't settled freshly stuck. Someone had placed it there not long before I saw it. Someone wanted it seen. But by whom? And why, without words, I looked around the room trying to reconstruct who might have passed through, whether anyone had watched me earlier. The overhead lights flickered once barely noticeable, but enough to make the room feel colder. I backed away from the note and exhaled slowly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe Emma avoided me simply because she was distracted. Maybe the residents weren't talking about anything meaningful, but every maybe felt thinner than the last. I left the break room once more, walking with deliberate calm through the corridor that led toward the main staff exit. I told myself I would go home, rest, reset. But as I scanned my badge for the second time that day, an alert flashed on the small screen: temporary access override permitted. That message wasn't normal. It wasn't even common. Access overrides only happened when someone with higher administrative clearance prompted the system. As far as I knew, no one should have been adjusting permissions for me. A chill crept up my back. Someone had changed my access. Someone with authority. Someone thinking ahead. The sticky note burned in my memory. Emma's glance, the ajar door, the altered atmosphere, they all tightened into a single line of dread. For the first time, a thought I didn't want entered my mind. What if the setup had already begun long before I noticed it? And what if the person behind it knew exactly how to make me walk straight into it? I returned to the hospital that evening to grab the badge reel I'd left clipped to my scrub jacket, telling myself it was just a quick stop. Nothing more, but the moment I stepped into the OR wing, the air felt too clean, too cold, as if someone had turned the ventilation higher to scrub away something invisible. The corridors had emptied after shift change, leaving only the faint hum of machines and the distant echo of rolling carts. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud against the polished floor, each one reminding me that I shouldn't have come back alone. I told myself to move quickly to ignore the tension crawling under my skin, but the deeper I walked, the more the silence pressed against my ears like padded walls. A metal tray sat in the center of the hallway outside OR3, positioned too precisely to be accidental, its surface gleaming beneath the overhead lights with a cold, almost predatory shine. It hadn't been there earlier. Metal trays don't move on their own. Someone had placed it there with intention. I slowed, staring at it, feeling a strange tightness gather in my throat. The tray wasn't empty. Something small and crumpled lay near the corner, white plastic flattened, partially hidden by the rim. I crouched and picked it up. A surgical wrapper. Crushed. The edges torn just enough to show it had been opened quickly, not by standard technique. The printed label along the seam read, Ref 88LR, and the timestamp in the corner made my pulse stumble. It didn't match the OR log. It didn't match any shift schedule. Evidence number 1. My fingers went cold around the wrapper. Or supply tracking is exact. Wrappers don't get opened without documentation. A mismatched timestamp meant someone used sterile supplies outside scheduled procedure hours. Worse, someone used them while the OR was supposed to be locked down. I set the wrapper onto the metal tray, listening to the brittle crackle as it landed. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty hallway, sharp enough to make me flinch. A flicker of motion near the corner of my eye made me turn. Emma stood at the far end of the corridor, half hidden behind the curve of the wall, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. She froze when she saw me stare back at her. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she stepped forward, but only by an inch, the movement so small it felt more like hesitation than intention. "Lauren," she asked softly, her voice carrying an edge of fear she tried to swallow. I straightened the wrapper, still imprinting cold against my palm. "Why is this here?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. She glanced at the tray, then at the wrapper, then quickly away, her eyes darting like she expected someone to appear behind me. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered the words, trembling even though she kept her face composed. "Not tonight." I stepped closer. "You warned me earlier." Her jaw tightened, muscles clenching, and she didn't deny it. Instead, she murmured, "Someone's watching the logs. Someone's checking badge scans. You walking around the OR wing off shift will raise flags." Her gaze flicked toward the ceiling cameras, then back to me. "You don't want those flags pointing at you." I tried to breathe slowly, but the metallic scent of the hallway made every inhale sharp. "Who opened this wrapper?" She shook her head, pressing her lips together. "Not here." The way she said it made the corridor feel smaller. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting me. I looked again at the metal tray, the wrapper resting like evidence laid out deliberately. The timestamp replayed in my mind. Whoever did this wasn't sloppy, they wanted it found. But by whom? I crouched again, scanning the wrapper for more detail. The time code printed in small black digits marked it at a time when OR3 should have been locked, sealed, silent. A silence gap flickers between steps. The phrase ghosted through me again, making my pulse stutter. Emma backed away a step, her shoes squeaking faintly. "I have to go," she whispered. "If anyone sees me talking to you, they'll ask questions I can't answer." "Emma." "Wait." "Please," she said sharply, surprising both of us. "Not here." Her voice trembled on the last word. She turned and hurried down the hallway, her shoulders tight, her steps too fast for someone who claimed to be simply leaving. I watched her disappear around the corner, the echo of her footsteps slipping into that strange, unnatural quiet. The hallway felt colder now, the lights harsher, the shadows sharper. I tried to convince myself I could leave, forget what I found, pretend this wasn't intentional. But the wrapper sat on the metal tray like a silent accusation. Someone used supplies for an unscheduled purpose. Someone manipulated access. Someone opened OR3 without permission. And someone wanted me to walk into this. My throat tightened as I realized the truth. I didn't want to speak aloud. This wasn't just a procedural violation. This was groundwork. Preparation. A setup long enough in motion that no one would notice the missing pieces until something irreversible happened. I turned toward the OR3 doors. They remained shut, sealed, quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt staged. I placed a hand on the metal tray, grounding myself, the cold surface biting against my skin. The wrapper stared back at me with its mismatched timestamp, its crushed shape, its silent warning. Evidence number 1 was real, and the fracture in the story wasn't subtle anymore. It was opening, widening, revealing something dangerous beneath. I stood alone in the hallway, understanding with a clarity that hurt whoever set this up hadn't made a mistake. They had left a breadcrumb, and I was the one expected to pick it up. The corridor outside OR3 the next morning was louder than usual, crowded with enough people to turn every small sound into an echo. A patient family waited near the benches, a vendor maneuvered a rolling cart stacked with wrapped instrument packs, and 2 residents argued in low, clipped voices over a case chart. The noise should have felt normal, familiar, even, but instead it made my skin tighten. Public spaces inside a hospital always felt like strange stages, everyone pretending calm while quietly bracing for the next unexpected shift. But today the tension tasted different. It felt like the air had been holding its breath since last night. I tried to walk casually, moving with the practiced ease of someone who belonged here, but my heartbeat thudded too sharply. As I approached the OR wing, I noticed something small and out of place on the wall. The framed photo of our surgical team hung crooked. Yesterday, it sat perfectly level. Today, its lower right corner had slipped, tilting downward just enough to catch the eye. It bothered me more than it should have, the way a single misaligned frame can make a whole room feel wrong. I reached up, fingertips brushing the cool glass as I straightened it, trying to steady myself with the motion. Lauren. My name behind me, ComDirect carrying a weight I didn't want to acknowledge. I turned to see Dr. Marcus Levy standing there, dressed in his usual reserved manner pressed lab coat pen, clipped neatly to the chest pocket, not a single hair out of place. But the tension around his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't here for routine. Before I could speak, he lifted his phone and held it up between us. "You need to hear something." I hesitated. The corridor quieted just enough that several nearby people could probably hear if he played anything too loud, but he didn't lower his hand. His urgency cut through my doubt. I nodded. He pressed play. Muffled voices emerged from the speaker, unclear but sharp in tone. Someone issued an order with clipped precision, the kind of directive used when prepping an OR for an emergent case. But there had been no emergent case last night, no scheduled procedure, no legitimate reason for anyone to be issuing OR commands. A timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen, 1942. Evidence number 2. My breath caught. The audio wasn't long, just a few seconds, but it didn't need to be. I knew immediately that someone had been preparing OR3 for something, and it wasn't an accident. Around us, heads turned. The 2 residents stopped talking. The vendor's wheels squeaked to a halt, and even the waiting family looked over with wary curiosity. A public scene unavoidable now. "Where did you get this?" I asked quietly. Marcus kept his gaze steady. "Security found it when reviewing corridor recordings from last night. They flagged it for departmental review." I swallowed, throat tight. "And you're showing it to me because—" His jaw flexed once subtly. "Because you were here. And because you're the only person whose badge registered access anomalies on the same shift." My body went cold. "I didn't go into the OR. I know he said. But the system doesn't." He let that settle between us. The background chatter softened as more people sensed something unusual unfolding. In an environment built on protocol deviations, stood out like broken bones. "What did security say?" I asked. Marcus lowered the phone but didn't pocket it. "They said the recording isn't long enough to identify who was inside, but the command tone suggests someone in a leadership role." A chill ran through me. "You think it was an attending?" "I think someone with authority deliberately accessed a closed OR," he said, "and manipulated the logs to hide it." My pulse hammered so strongly I felt it in my palms. Emma appeared, then silent, cautious, approaching from the far end of the hall. Her eyes flicked to the phone, still in Marcus's hand, then to me, then back again. She swallowed, her throat tightening. When she reached us, she kept her voice low. "You shouldn't be discussing this out here." Her words trembled beneath a forced professionalism. "We don't have a choice," Marcus said curtly. "Not anymore." Emma's eyes softened, fear mixed with guilt. She glanced at the misaligned photo frame I had just straightened her gaze, tracking the exact spot my fingers had touched moments earlier. A tiny, almost imperceptible sign of knowing, recognizing. A stolen glance that sliced clean. She looked away quickly, her breath hitching. I stepped closer. "Emma, what did you hear last night?" She shook her head. "I wasn't supposed to be near OR3. That's not what I asked." Her shoulders rose and fell with a quiet shiver. "I heard voices and movement, but when I checked the board, everything was clear. No one should have been in there." She hesitated, lowering her voice even more. "Someone told me to go home early. Someone who never talks to me directly." Marcus's eyes sharpened. Who Emma didn't answer, but her silence told us more than any name could have. I exhaled slowly, trying to make sense of the pieces clicking together in increasingly alarming ways. The sticky note, the agitator, the crushed wrapper, now this recording. None of it pointed to coincidence. Around us, the corridor's energy shifted again. People pretended to focus on their tasks, but kept glancing overdrawn by the quiet gravity of something too unusual to ignore. A public moment, a subtle humiliation, and a warning. Marcus lowered his voice. "The recording. You understand the implication, right? I do," I whispered. "Someone was staging the OR, and they were doing it during a period where your badge was flagged." "I didn't enter the room," I said again, firmer this time. "I know," he repeated, "but the system thinks otherwise." Emma stepped back suddenly, eyes wide, as if she'd sensed someone approaching behind her. I looked, but no one was close enough to overhear. Her fear felt too visceral to ignore. "Emma," I said softly, "what aren't you telling us?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, shaking her head rapidly. "Not here," she whispered. "Please, not here." Marcus exchanged a glance with her, a complicated, understanding one, then looked back at me. "We need to be careful." "Careful of what?" I asked. His answer was low, almost inaudible. "Careful of who's watching." The hallway suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. The misaligned photo frame behind me felt symbolic now, something nudged out of place, slightly off, quietly announcing that someone had been here before me and touched the environment with the intention of sending a message. The air thickened. Somewhere deeper in the wing, a monitor beeped a single sharp tone that faded quickly but echoed with the finality of a warning shot. Emma took another step backward, her eyes glossy with panic. "I need to go," she whispered. "Emma," I started, but she shook her head hard. "If I stay here, someone will think I'm talking," she said, voice cracking. "And if they think that, I don't know what they'll do." She turned and walked away, her pace too fast, too tense. Marcus stood beside me, silent. I felt the same dread I'd felt last night, spread slowly, deliberately, with the certainty of a truth coming to light whether I wanted it or not. The wrapper, the recording, the timestamp, the glances, all of it lined up like pieces of a plan I was only now beginning to see. Marcus spoke quietly. "This isn't random." "I know. It's organized," he added. "Calculated." "I know that too. Who benefits from setting up an OR like this?" My stomach twisted. Only one name answered the question. A name I wasn't ready to say in a crowded hallway. A name that had access, authority, and motive. Marcus watched my face, and when I didn't answer, he exhaled with a grim understanding. "We'll talk more later." he said, lowering his phone. "But Lauren, be careful. Something is unfolding, and you're at the center of it whether you want to be or not." The misaligned frame remained behind me, silent and crooked, mirroring the truth I refused to speak aloud. Someone was orchestrating something through the OR, someone with precision, someone who expected me to notice, someone who had already taken the first step toward pulling me deeper into it. And I finally understood the public scene wasn't accidental. It was part of the setup. I pushed into the prep room behind OR3 with the intention of catching my breath, but the moment the door clicked shut behind me, the cold countertop drew my attention like a magnet, its surface unnaturally spotless, as if someone had wiped away not just dust, but evidence of any presence at all. I set my hands on the counter, letting the chill bleed into my palms until it numbed the trembling I hadn't realized had spread through my fingers. The overhead lights buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow that sharpened every corner of the room. Everything here looked too arranged, gloves lined up in symmetrical stacks, drape packs squared at perfect angles, anesthesia tubing coiled neatly like someone was preparing for a demonstration rather than a real procedure. I scanned the room again, unease crawling higher with every detail. This wasn't how we left a prep room at end of shift. It was staged not the kind of staging meant to impress auditors, but the kind that hid something behind its perfection. I glanced at the wall clock, expecting the simple reassurance of steady time, but a prickle of confusion ran through me. The numbers didn't match what I'd seen in the hallway not 10 minutes earlier. I blinked, stepped closer, checked again. There was a missing minute gone unaccounted for, like someone had spliced time. Or clocks don't slip, don't glitch, don't drift. They're synchronized across the system. Evidence number 3. My heart lurched as the truth hit. Someone had tampered with the timestamp, and tampering with time inside a surgical unit wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate covering of tracks. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but even my breath sounded too loud in the room. A silence gap flickers between steps. The phrase pulsed through my mind again, not imagined this time, but felt something about the room's stillness carried an unnatural pressure, like the silence wasn't absence of sound, but suppression of it. I turned toward the supply drawers, noticing one was open by half an inch, its metal edge catching the light. I approached it cautiously, nudging it open with my knuckles. Inside the normally chaotic assortment of small items, IV caps, labels, tape sat perfectly aligned, which made the lone strip of missing tape stand out starkly. Someone had been here. Recently. And they'd been deliberate. A faint clicking sound echoed from the hallway outside, soft enough that it could have been a shoe or a piece of equipment settling, but it sent a jolt through me. I stepped back from the drawer, suddenly aware of how visible I was through the small window inset in the prep room door. I crossed to it, peering out with slow caution. The hallway was empty, no footsteps. No voices, just that odd sensation that someone had passed through moments before I looked. The missing minute nagged at me. It wasn't a small clerical malfunction, it was a manipulation with purpose. Altering a timestamp meant altering a record, and altering a record meant someone didn't want anyone knowing exactly when they'd been here. My husband's name pushed at the edge of my mind again, unwanted, uninvited. I tried to push it back to pretend I wasn't already connecting him to every discrepancy I'd seen since last night. The wrapper, the whispered warning, the clipped recording with a 1942 timestamp, the shift mismatch in Marcus's hand. but the image of him standing in his office late one evening months ago, quietly adjusting a surgical report, refusing to explain, flashed so vividly that I closed my eyes against it. That memory had been a soft alarm I ignored. Now, it screamed. I moved around the prep room, slowly examining the little inconsistencies that only someone who worked here daily would spot: a set of retractors placed on the wrong shelf, a roll of mesh suture tape left slightly unspooled, a basin liner folded too tightly. None were large mistakes. All were the type made by someone trying to imitate sterile prep without actually knowing the natural flow. Someone faking normal. The cold countertop drew my attention again, its perfect shine reflecting my face in distorted clarity. I rested my fingertips on it, grounding myself. I needed logic. I needed control of my thoughts. I needed to stop imagining things. But then I saw it. A small piece of lint, just a fiber, almost invisible, stuck to the metal near the edge. No one leaves lint on an OR prep surface. No one. I scraped it away gently, my stomach twisting. This wasn't sloppiness. This was someone rushing, someone rehearsing, but not mastering the details. Someone preparing for something that should have been logged but wasn't. I heard it again, a faint shuffle outside. This time I stepped close to the door, pressing my ear to the small seam between it and the frame. Nothing followed, but the hair on my arms lifted anyway. I backed away, breath caught halfway in my throat. Every instinct in me screamed that I wasn't alone, even if the room pretended otherwise. I turned toward the clock again, staring at that missing minute, as if it might shape itself into an answer. But why would someone alter the clock? Why would they care about a single minute, unless that minute held an action they didn't want recorded? A minute long enough for someone to enter or exit. A minute long enough to place something inside a room. A minute long enough to stage an OR. The walls felt too close now. I reached for the prep room door handle, urging myself to get out to breathe air that didn't feel rehearsed. But before I could twist it, I caught movement in the reflection on the countertop, a shape passing by the small window in the door. My pulse jumped violently. I held myself still until the shadow slipped out of view. I needed answers, but the room held none. Only threats whispered behind silence. I pushed out into the hallway, expecting to find someone waiting, but the corridor stretched empty again, too empty. That same artificial quiet draped itself over the OR wing, heavy as a lead apron. I stared at the OR3 doors farther down. Closed. Still. Watching. The missing minute pulsed through me again. My badge buzzed once, a soft vibration against my hip from inside my pocket. I yanked it out, scanning the screen. Another odd message. Access verified, unscheduled, entry logged. My throat closed. I hadn't scanned into anything. Someone else had triggered my badge. Someone had used my access to mask their movement. Every piece of this, every detail, every discrepancy aligned into a single horrifying truth. Someone wasn't just setting up an OR. They were setting up a narrative. And they were using my credentials to do it. I stood in that silent corridor, my heart hammering as I looked toward OR3, understanding with absolute clarity that the setup wasn't theoretical anymore. It had already begun. I stepped back into OR3 with the kind of caution usually reserved for stepping into a room where someone is actively hiding. The air felt heavier than it had any right to be, filled with a sterile chill that clung to my arms as if the vents had been turned to maximum without anyone authorizing the change. My wristband, still looped around my arm from earlier, trembled as the cool air shifted a tiny vibration that shouldn't have mattered, but suddenly felt like a warning. I pressed my fingers against it to stop the shaking, but it only made me more aware of the way my pulse fluttered beneath the plastic. It wasn't fear alone. It was recognition. Something here was wrong, deeply wrong, and my body understood it before my mind caught up. The OR was lit but empty, overly illuminated, as though someone had prepared the room for an inspection rather than a procedure. The surgical table sat centered under the overhead lamps, which cast such stark beams that the shadows around the room looked sliced apart rather than blended. The overhead monitor glowed faintly, and when I turned toward it, my breath caught in my throat. Someone had left the OR cameras open, not just a live feed, but a specific still frame frozen on the screen. Frame 1472. Evidence number 4. I stepped closer, drawn to it the way someone is drawn toward the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall could kill them, but unable to stop approaching. The still image showed the OR exactly as it looked now, same table, same instruments, same trays, but there was a difference that punched through me with surgical precision. The light in the still was wrong. A cut light line sliced diagonally across the center of the image, bright and harsh, angled in a way that didn't match the current position of the lamps above me. I looked up instinctively. The lamps were aligned straight down. No diagonal, no shift, which meant the angle in the photo had been produced earlier, under different positioning, by someone manually adjusting the lamp. Someone who wanted the lighting to obscure or highlight a specific section of the table. Silence splits under the cut light. The motif echo struck through me like a blade, its truth unfolding in real time. I exhaled softly, the sound barely audible beneath the hum of machines, yet it felt deafening in the room's unnatural quiet. I wasn't imagining any of this. Someone had altered the lights. Someone had captured the room under those altered lights, and someone had left the evidence for me to find. My wristband trembled again, almost vibrating this time. I rubbed my thumb along its edge, grounding myself as I stepped closer to the screen. The timestamp beneath frame number 1472 had been partially erased, the digital numbers smudged as if someone had tried to remove the exact moment it was taken. But not all of it was gone. Faint shadows of digits remained, enough to imply the truth the still had been captured during the same window as the missing minute. My jaw tightened. I leaned closer, studying the lower left corner of the image where a faint blur suggested someone had moved in the frame just before the capture. A sleeve, maybe? A gloved hand? A figure who stepped out of range too quickly to be caught clearly, and yet the shadow was unmistakably human. I turned slowly, scanning the OR from wall to wall, as if expecting the person from the image to still be here watching me from just beyond the glare. Nothing moved. No sounds broke the tension. But the feeling of being watched pressed so hard against my skin that I had to force myself to breathe normally. The trembling wristband felt symbolic now, a tiny involuntary motion echoing the tremor of danger crawling along the edges of the room. I walked around the table, examining the instruments arranged with uncanny precision. Clamps and forceps lined up too perfectly, drapes folded in sharp triangles. Scalpels positioned at angles identical enough to look measured with a ruler. No OR tech preps a room like that. This wasn't real preparation. It was choreography, staged, photographed, documented, and then left behind like a message. I turned toward the anesthesia cart. The drawer handle bore the faintest smudge, too small to be noticeable unless you knew exactly where to look. I reached out and touched it, the metal chilled beneath my fingertips. The smudge wasn't dust or residue, it was the oily imprint of a glove dragging along the surface. Someone had opened the drawer. Someone had touched this cart. Someone who didn't want to leave fingerprints. A cold prickle moved down the side of my neck. I examined the floor next to the tiles gleaming beneath the harsh lights. A tiny streak barely visible ran from the center of the floor toward the far corner as though someone had pivoted abruptly. I followed the line to where it ended near a small stainless steel cabinet. My reflection stared back at me, pale, tense eyes too wide. For a split second, I thought I saw movement behind me in the reflection. I spun around. Nothing. But the adrenaline flooding through me made me dizzy. I forced myself toward the monitor again, studying the still image. The cut light line burned across the table like an accusation. Someone had wanted that angle. Someone had needed the light to hit exactly that way. "What were you trying to show?" I whispered under my breath, though the question wasn't meant for anyone present. It was meant for the ghost of whoever had moved through the room before me. Silence pressed in on me again, but this time it felt different. Not absence, but anticipation. A deliberate quiet. A silence held carefully shaped intentionally. I followed the direction of the cut light line in the still, allowing it to guide my gaze to the physical table before me. The line, though not present now, would have illuminated the lower half of the table, exactly where a patient's torso would be, or where a body would lie, or where someone might place something they didn't want visible under standard lighting. My stomach twisted. I reached out and touched the table's padded surface. Cold. Too cold. Like no one had turned off the cooling cycle after prepping it. A preparation for a non-existent case. A procedure without a patient. A room staged for a performance that never happened or hadn't happened yet. My wristband trembled again, stronger this time as the cold vents blew directly onto my skin. I pressed my palm flat over it, trying to stop the shaking. My breath caught on a whisper of motion behind me, a tray settling or something shifting its weight. I turned sharply, eyes scanning the room's edges. That's when the truth hit me with full force. The OR had been staged precisely because someone wanted plausible deniability. They had created a setup that would look like a routine emergency at a glance, even if nothing about it followed protocol. And if this room looked ready, then anyone who entered could be framed as participating, including me. I took one step back, heart pounding, then another. I reached the door, my hand slipping slightly on the cold metal handle. As I opened it, I looked over my shoulder at the still frame one last time. Silence splits under the cut light. The motif echo reverberated in my bones. The truth was no longer subtle. It was carved in light. Someone had used this room. Someone had recorded it. Someone had altered time itself to hide their presence. And someone expected me to uncover exactly what they'd done, just slowly enough that I couldn't escape the fallout. Marcus found me in the consultation alcove just outside the OR wing. His posture rigid in a way I'd never seen before, as if he'd spent the last hour holding himself together with the thin thread of professionalism. The clicking pen in his hand ruined the facade. The steady, repetitive tap of plastic against his thumb betrayed nerves he'd rather die than show in public. He didn't ask if I was all right. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He simply said, "We need to talk," in a tone that cut straight through the frantic noise in my head. I followed him into the alcove, a narrow space lined with laminated charts and outdated posters about scrub protocols. He positioned himself so he could see both the hallway and me at once, the pen still clicking with quiet urgency. "Something's happening behind the scenes," he said, keeping his voice low. "Something involving access logs, or prep, and unauthorized entries." I felt the trembling in my wristband again, faint but insistent, a small echo of the fear tightening through my chest. "I know," I whispered. I saw the still frame, the lighting, He cut me off with a small shake of his head. "This goes deeper than lighting, Lauren. I need you to look at something." He handed me a printed schedule sheet. The moment my eyes fell on the staff assignments, everything inside me constricted. There it was, highlighted in faint gray ink, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The shift mismatch. Evidence number 5. Or 3 listed and attending as present last night during a time block where the room was dark closed and supposed to be empty. The initials beside the entry were unmistakable AH. My husband. My stomach twisted so violently I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. "This can't be right," I whispered, but even as I said it, the protest tasted hollow. Marcus watched me carefully, clicking the pen once, twice, 3 times, in slow succession. "I confronted the staffing system administrator," he said. "They didn't add this entry. Someone overrode it from a higher level account." My breath hitched. "Admin level override." "Yes." The pen clicked again. Only attending surgeons or department heads have that kind of access. So someone forged the shift presence. Not someone, Marcus said quietly. "The initials point to one person." My pulse hammered so loudly I thought he could hear it. He leaned in, slightly lowering his voice further. "Lauren, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly." My throat tightened. "Did your husband come back to the hospital last night?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The truth pulsed behind my ribs like a bruise. He had told me he'd be working late on administrative reports. He'd kissed me on the forehead before stepping into his office. He'd said not to wait up. But he hadn't told me he would be here. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what he did." Marcus nodded slowly like he had expected that answer. "Then you need to see the rest." He took the pen, uncapped it, and circled a small note in the corner of the printed sheet. "Badge scan override accepted." "Accepted. Your badge registered entry logs last night," he said. "But I checked the internal cameras. It wasn't you." A cold chill raced through me. He used my badge. "Or cloned it," Marcus said. "Either way, someone wanted it to look like you entered the OR wing during the window when the room was being staged." My skin prickled. A setup within a setup. A narrative layered so carefully that anyone outside the situation would read it as truth without question. Someone didn't just want me involved, they wanted me implicated. A subtle sound behind us made both our heads snap toward the hall. Emma was there a few steps away, her expression raw and shaken. She looked like she'd been standing there for at least a minute, gathering the courage to speak. Her voice was almost inaudible. "You're in danger, Lauren." Marcus didn't react outwardly, but his hand closed around the pen until his knuckles whitened. "What do you know?" he asked. She shook her head, fear radiating off her in waves. "Not here. Not in the open." "You've said that before," I said, taking a step toward her. "Why can't you just tell us?" Her eyes glistened with panic. "Because I heard things I wasn't supposed to hear, and he saw me." My stomach plummeted. "Who saw you?" Her gaze darted toward the OR wing. She didn't say the name, but she didn't have to. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Marcus glanced down the hall, scanning for passing staff. "Emma," he said softly, "if you know something, you need to tell us before someone else gets hurt." Emma's breath shuddered. "I heard him talking to someone on the phone last night. He said he needed the room prepped and the logs cleared. He said it had to look like someone else triggered the access." My lungs constricted. "Did he say who?" She swallowed. "He said your name." The room tilted. For a second, all I heard was the pounding of blood in my ears. Marcus steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. "Why would he do that?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already had theories. Emma wrung her hands. "I don't know. But he told me to leave early. Ordered me, actually. And then, when I hesitated, he looked at me like..." She cut herself off, trembling. The silence that followed held more truth than any words she could have chosen. Marcus clicked the pen again, slow and deliberate. "Lauren," he said, "we have enough to escalate this, but we need more specifics before we can confront him directly." "You want more evidence," I rasped. "I want proof that can't be dismissed," he said, "because if a surgeon with his authority is staging a room manipulating logs and using your badge to frame movement, then this isn't just misconduct." His eyes locked with mine. "It's premeditation." My skin turned to ice. "Premeditation for what?" "That Marcus said is what we still need to determine." Footsteps echoed around the corner, and Emma flinched violently. "I have to go," she whispered. "If he sees me talking to you, he'll know I told you something." "Emma." I reached for her, but she backed away, fast, eyes wide with dread. "Please," she whispered. "Don't ask me anything else. Not until you know more." She turned and disappeared down the hall, leaving behind the faint scent of antiseptic and fear. Marcus closed the schedule sheet and slipped it into his coat. "You understand what this means," he said. "If he's altering logs, staging an OR, and pulling your credentials into the mix, then the next phase of his plan is already in motion." A wave of cold rolled through me. "How do we stop it?" He clicked the pen one final time. "We expose him before he completes it." "And what if we're too late?" "Then," Marcus said quietly, "he isn't planning an OR setup." His gaze drifted toward OR3. "He's planning a cover story." The trembling of my wristband felt like a warning bell as the truth settled over me. Whatever my husband was orchestrating, I was no longer just adjacent to it. I was the target. I didn't plan to return to the archives room, but my feet carried me there anyway, as if some hidden part of me already knew that the real answer, waited buried in the files I'd been trying to forget for months. The moment I stepped inside, the uneven chair leg scraped against the floor with an awful wobble. As I sat down, the instability of it mirroring the unraveling truth tightening around my throat. I logged into the system with trembling fingers, my breath catching as the screen blinked to life. I typed in the search terms I'd hoped never to revisit: surgical reports, corrections, late-night edits. The files loaded slowly, each one a ghost of a moment I once dismissed, each one reminding me that doubt had whispered to me long before I had the courage to listen. Then I saw it, the report, the one I'd walked in on him fixing. My stomach knotted so violently I nearly pushed away from the desk. The formatting was off. Not enough to alarm a casual reader, but to me, to someone who understood every nuance of the documentation system, it was glaring. A margin shifted by a millimeter, a line spacing irregularity, a signature block lightly distorted, and there at the bottom corner, the tiny initials AH, my husband, evidence number 6. A memory crashed into me, seeing him hunched over his office computer late one night, insisting he was correcting clerical errors, brushing off my questions with a smile that never reached his eyes. "It's just a report, Lauren," he said back then. "Don't overthink it." But now, staring at this altered document, I saw the truth. I'd refused to acknowledge that was the first time he'd rehearsed manipulation under the guise of routine. And this entire OR setup was the perfected version. My breath trembled in my chest. The uneven chair creaked under me as I leaned forward, studying every detail of the report as if it might rewrite itself into innocence. It didn't. It only grew more damning with each passing second. Behind me, the archives door clicked softly. My pulse shot upward. I turned, expecting Marcus, but instead, it was Emma. Her face drawn tight, her eyes red-rimmed. She shut the door quickly and pressed her back against it, breathing fast. "You shouldn't be in here," she whispered. "Not alone." "You saw something I said?" My voice thin. She flinched. "I shouldn't have heard anything. I wasn't supposed to." I stood slowly. "Emma, what did he say?" She squeezed her hands together, knuckles whitening. "He was on the phone. I only heard pieces. But he said it had to look real. He said the room needed to be ready if anyone asked. And he said your badge would make the timeline clean." My heart lurched. "My badge?" "He knows the system." "Lauren," she whispered fiercely. "He knows how to move through blind spots. If he wants it to look like you were there, the logs will say you were, even if you never touched the door." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Emma!" "What else?" She swallowed hard, voice cracking. "He said he didn't want things to get messy unless they had to." The word messy wrapped around my spine like ice. "Why would he say that? I don't know," she whispered. But he was angry, not loud, angry, quiet, angry. The kind of angry where you don't see it in his voice, you see it in the way he stops blinking. A shiver crawled across my skin. I knew that version of him too well. The uneven chair wobbled as I sank back down, palm pressing over my wristband to steady my shaking. "He's planning something for tonight," Emma said. "I don't know what, but he told someone he needed everything set before midnight." Midnight. The exact time the missing minute appeared. The exact time the OR had been photographed. The exact time the logs were doctored. "Why me?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. Emma's voice softened with a painful kind of pity. "Because you'd never think he'd hurt you." I closed my eyes, breath hitching. "He wouldn't." "Lauren." Her silence said everything her voice couldn't. I looked up at her, and in her trembling expression, I saw something I had tried to silence for months. He was capable. He had always been capable. I just never believed he'd aim it at me. "Emma," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "If he's using my badge, if he's staging the OR, if he's altering logs, what's the end game?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a raw whisper. "He wants a story the hospital will believe, one where he's the hero, one where something happened in that OR. And you were involved." My breath collapsed in my throat. "Involved in what?" She shook her head violently. "I don't know, Lauren, but whatever it is, it's already in motion." The chair shifted again beneath me, the uneven legs scraping the tile in a long, uneven groan that sounded far too much like a warning. My husband hadn't just manipulated the OR. He'd manipulated the narrative. And the next step wasn't going to be about staging. It was going to be about execution. The hallway outside the OR wing felt longer than it ever had, a narrow tunnel of white light and polished floors that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of me. Every step I took sounded too loud, too exposed, like the hospital itself was listening. A door near the central station sat slightly ajar, just barely, but enough for a thin beam of fluorescent light to spill across the floor in a pale, fractured line. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe near it. The gap felt intentional, like a trap someone left half open so curiosity could finish the job. Marcus appeared from around the corner, tablet in hand, his face tight with a seriousness that made my pulse trip. I found something he said without greeting. "You need to see it." His voice was low, urgent, the kind of tone a person uses only when the truth is already too big to contain. He stepped closer and angled the tablet toward me. "Camera 3B, he said. Hallway feed. Time code 2 hours before your badge was flagged." The screen lit my face with a cold glow. Grainy footage filled the display, still clear enough to confirm what mattered. A solitary figure approached the OR wing with purposeful strides. Not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate. Intentional. The badge tap wasn't visible from the camera angle, but the way he reached toward the access panel told the whole story. He entered the OR wing with a familiarity that didn't require thought. I recognized the gate before the frame fully loaded. I recognized the shoulders, the posture, the casual ease of his arm swinging at his side. Recognition hit me so hard I swayed. My husband. Evidence number 7. My lips parted, but no sound emerged. Marcus spoke softly, as if afraid volume alone might shatter me. "That wasn't you, Lauren. And the system still logged your badge at this time." My breath tightened painfully. "He used my access. Or cloned it," Marcus said. "But the intent is the same." I stared at the footage, unable to blink. My husband crossed the screen with the kind of confidence that came from knowing every blind spot in the building. He didn't even glance around. He knew no one would question him. He disappeared through the OR wing doors, and the hallway fell still again. The slightly ajar door behind me creaked softly as if reacting to his ghost. "There's more," Marcus said. "There always is." I whispered, my voice thin. He nodded grimly. "I spoke with the night shift supervisor. There's talk of an unauthorized case being arranged. No chart, no consent, no patient on the board. It's all rumor, but it lines up with everything else." My stomach twisted. "He wouldn't." "He would," Marcus said, not unkindly. because he believes he can get away with anything if he controls the records. The fluorescent lights above us buzzed faintly, that electric hum sinking into my bones. Footsteps echoed behind us, quick ones, soft ones. "Emma." She stopped a few feet away, breathless, eyes wide with terror and guilt. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "But I had to warn you." Marcus stepped aside, giving her space. "What happened now?" Emma's gaze flicked toward the slightly ajar door, then back to me. "He was in OR3 earlier. I saw him alone. No lights on except the overhead surgical lamp. He didn't see me, but he was pacing and talking to himself and setting things on the table. My blood ran cold." "Setting what I don't know," she whispered. "Instruments, drapes, something small in a vial. I only saw it for a second." Her voice trembled. "But it wasn't for a patient. No prep, no chart, no timer running. Just him." He kept looking at the door like he was waiting for someone. Waiting for who, I asked, though the answer was already forming in a sickening lurch in my gut. Emma swallowed hard, eyes shining. "You." The air punched out of my lungs. Marcus cursed under his breath, something sharp and unfamiliar from a man who rarely allowed emotion to slip. "We need to get you out of here," he said. "Now." But I hardly heard him because the weight of everything, the wrapper, the recording, the missing minute, the staged lighting, the altered report, the shift mismatch, the cloned badge, the CCTV feed crashed into place in one horrific, unified realization. My husband wasn't just setting up an OR. He was setting up a narrative. One where I walked into OR3. One where I had motive. One where he had documentation. One where he could claim he tried to save me. My voice barely formed the words. "He's going to stage an incident." Emma nodded shakily. "Before midnight. Midnight. The time he told someone to prepare everything. The time the still frame was captured. The time the logs were altered. Marcus grabbed my arm not roughly, but firmly. "Lauren, listen to me. If what Emma overheard is accurate, then whatever he's planning is imminent." The ajar door creaked behind us again, its thin sliver of light cutting across the floor like a warning line. Emma flinched so violently she stumbled back. "We need to go," she whispered, "before he realizes you're not where he expects you to be." My heart thundered. I looked at the CCTV feed one more time, at the familiar stride of the man I thought I knew. I tasted metal in my mouth like fear had coated my tongue. And I understood deep and absolute that the trap wasn't metaphorical. It wasn't hypothetical. It was real. And it was already waiting for me behind one of those doors. Night settled over the hospital like a thin sheet of glass, clear, fragile, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. The corridors felt unnervingly hollow. The kind of emptiness that didn't come from quiet hours, but from deliberate withdrawal, as if the building itself sensed something was about to go terribly wrong. I walked toward the administrative vestibule with measured steps, each one echoing louder than the last, my nerves stretched taut. Marcus waited inside, standing rigidly near a desk, where a single bent receipt lay curled at the corner, its edge crumpled as though someone had crushed it in a moment of panic before smoothing it out with shaking hands. The bent receipt shouldn't have meant anything. Shouldn't have mattered among the weight of everything else, but the way it sat there. Small damage, distorted, felt like a perfect reflection of how fragile the narrative had become. He didn't greet me. He simply pushed a stack of printouts across the desk toward me. The final audit came in, he said, voice low, steady in the way that meant he was holding himself together by will alone. Look at line 27. I swallowed and read. Then read again. My stomach dropped through the floor. Entry number 27. OR3. Timestamp overwritten. Original entry scrubbed. New entry stamped with user code AH. My husband. Evidence number 8. The final truth. My breath snagged in my throat. It was the kind of proof even he couldn't manipulate, the kind that would hold up to every level of administrative review, the kind that spelled one thing unmistakably: intent. He forged the logs himself, Marcus said. This is no longer speculation. My hand shook. He knew exactly how the audit system works. He thought he could outrun it. He almost did, Marcus said quietly. But the scrubbed line left digital residue. The system flagged it. A rustle behind us made both of us turn. 3 night shift nurses stood clustered in the vestibule doorway, their eyes wide, their attention fixed on the printouts. They hadn't meant to gather for a scene, but one had followed another and another, drawn by the tension radiating through the hall like a heat signal. A public moment unavoidable now. I realized suddenly this was no longer a private investigation or whispered suspicion. This was exposure. Witnessed exposure. Emma stepped forward from behind the group, wringing her hands, her fear overshadowed by a desperate need to speak before silence crushed her. I saw him, she blurted, voice cracking. I saw him in the OR earlier. He was setting things up, not for a patient, for something else. She couldn't finish. The nurses exchanged glances, understanding dawning with a horror none of them dared to voice. Marcus didn't waste another second. He gestured toward the OR wing. We confront him now, he said, before he tries to erase anything else. My pulse hammered as we moved, the small cluster of nurses following us like witnesses pulled by invisible gravity. The bent receipt stayed on the desk behind us, but its weight traveled with me, a tiny symbol of the lie that folded then refolded until it tore. As we reached OR3, the doors glowed with the faint reflection of the overhead corridor lights. Marcus pushed them open. The sight inside stopped my breath. My husband stood at the surgical table, adjusting a lineup of instruments with calm precision. Drapes sat folded at perfect angles, syringes aligned, a vial placed just off-center, too small to identify, too suspicious to ignore. He looked up at us. Surprise flickered across his face, but only for a fraction of a second. Then his expression flattened into practiced composure. "What are you doing here?" he asked, tone-controlled, neutral enough to sound almost bored. Marcus stepped forward, holding the printouts like a verdict. "We need to talk about the logs." "Logs?" My husband repeated, eyebrows lifting with manufactured confusion. "What logs?" "Don't!" I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with fury. "Not this time." He turned his gaze to me, calm, unreadable, calculating. "Lauren," he said gently, like speaking to a fragile patient. "You look overwhelmed. Maybe you should—" "Stop!" I snapped. "Stop pretending you don't know what this is." His jaw twitched. "A tiny fracture." Marcus lifted the audit sheets. Entry number 27 was scrubbed and rewritten using your credentials. The system flagged the alteration. My husband's eyes cooled instantly. "That's absurd. There must be a glitch." "There is no glitch," Marcus said sharply. We have the residue trail. The user code matches. You accessed the OR during unscheduled hours. You manipulated the logs. A murmur rippled through the nurses behind us. Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I saw you in here earlier. Alone. You were preparing the table. There wasn't a case. There wasn't a patient. His gaze snapped to her with a chilling sharpness. You're mistaken. I'm not, she whispered. You told me to leave early. And when I hesitated, you... Her words faltered, fear stealing her breath, but the meaning was unmistakable. His composure cracked again, barely but enough for the room to feel it. I took a step toward him, my heart pounding, heat rising in my throat. What were you planning? He stared at me, expression flattening into something cold. I was fixing a documentation error, he said, voice clipped. That's all. You're all overreacting. Marcus didn't move. Then why use Lauren's badge? I didn't. Cameras say otherwise. My husband's face tightened. Cameras malfunction, logs malfunction, systems malfunction, 8 pieces of evidence don't malfunction, I said, stepping closer, feeling my voice strengthen, sharpen. The wrapper, the unscheduled badge override, the missing minute, the OR still, the shift mismatch, the altered report, the CCTV feed, and now the forged log. They all point to one person. His eyes flickered not fear but calculation. His silence turned heavier than any denial. The nurses watched him, breath held waiting. Emma clutched the edge of her sleeve, knuckles white. I felt something inside me break open, the part of me that still wanted to believe he wouldn't hurt me, that he couldn't do something like this. That fragment dissolved as I looked at the surgical table he'd staged. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intent. Deliberate, orchestrated intent. What was the plan? I asked again, softer this time, deadlier. His jaw locked. There was no plan. Then why prepare an OR for a case that doesn't exist? Marcus demanded. Why scrub logs? Why use your wife's access? The question hung in the air like a dropped instrument. My husband's answer came slow measured, chilling. You're all making assumptions based on incomplete information. Then give us the complete information, I said. He looked at me long enough that the room seemed to tilt. And then he smiled. Not warm, not apologetic. A thin, controlled curve of the lips that made every hair on my arms rise. No, he said quietly. I don't think I will. A shock of dread slammed into my chest. Marcus lifted the audit sheet's voice, ringing with finality. We have everything we need. You're done. My husband's expression shifted. Not panic, not anger. Something worse. Acceptance. As if he had expected this moment, as if he'd prepared for it. Behind me, one of the nurses whispered, "Oh my God." And in the silence that followed, the truth settled. The danger wasn't hypothetical anymore. The setup wasn't speculative. The final evidence had landed. And the story he tried to write, the one where I was the problem, had collapsed in front of a room full of witnesses. The bent receipt, the forged logs, the staged OR, the whole narrative had snapped. For the first time, he wasn't in control, and he knew it. The moment the truth cracked open, the shift in the room was immediate, silent, but seismic, like the pressure drop before a storm. My husband stood frozen beside the surgical table. He'd staged the drapes and instruments around him, arranged with the same precision he used to build the entire lie. But now, the lie had ruptured, and the pieces lay everywhere impossible to gather. A discarded glove rested near the base of the anesthesia cart, crumpled, twisted half inside out. It shouldn't have mattered, not compared to everything else, but its presence slammed into me like a revelation. He would never leave a glove like that. Never. Not unless something had jolted him out of his scripted performance. His eyes flicked toward it for the briefest second before snapping back to me, tension calcifying along his jaw. That tiny glance said everything the plan he'd constructed so carefully had slipped. And he knew it. Marcus stepped between us, his posture's steely voice carrying a weight he rarely unleashed.
"This is over. The logs are verified. The footage matches the timestamps. Your forgeries are documented."
My husband's expression barely twitched. "You still don't understand the full picture," he said, attempting one last controlled tone, but the edges were fraying, unraveling. A crack of strain split through the calm facade he'd maintained for months.
"I was correcting errors, protecting this department. By staging a room for a non-existent case," Marcus countered, "and using your wife's badge data to cover your tracks." My husband didn't answer.
His silence said more than any denial could. Behind us, the cluster of night shift nurses remained rooted in place, their faces taut with unease, the weight of what they were witnessing pressing them into stillness. Emma stood near the door, hands twisting in front of her breath, shallow. But she didn't back away. Not anymore. I stepped forward, pulse pounding, anger and grief threading so tightly I could no longer separate them. "What were you planning to do to me?" His eyes snapped to mine, sharp-focused, terrifyingly unreadable. "Nothing," he said. "You misinterpreted everything." "Stop lying," I snapped, voice shaking. "You altered logs. You manipulated entries. You staged an OR. You used my name, my badge, my presence. You wanted me pulled into the narrative so you could— what claim?" "I made a mistake. Claim you tried to save me. Paint yourself as the hero who intervened." His jaw flexed. The first full fracture. "Lauren," he said quietly, "you don't understand what you've done." My breath stuttered. "What I've done?" His gaze sharpened cold as a scalpel blade. "You forced my hand." Marcus moved closer, positioning himself slightly in front of me.
"Your hand wasn't forced,"
he said. "It was deliberate."
"No,"
my husband said, voice rising with a tremor of something darker. She kept asking questions. She kept looking where she didn't belong. She kept digging. I felt the room tilt. "So your solution was to frame me?"
"I wasn't framing you,"
he said. "I was protecting the unit, protecting my work, protecting us." By sacrificing me, I choked. His silence confirmed it. The discarded glove near the cart caught my eye again, how violently it had been removed, how hurriedly it had been left behind. He'd been sweating, rushing, losing control. I realized then that this wasn't the plan. This was the aftermath of a plan collapsing faster than he could adapt. Emma found her voice quiet but firm.
"We saw everything."
"You can't talk your way out of this." His head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing in a way that made every muscle in my body tense.
"You should have stayed quiet,"
he said. Emma flinched but didn't back away.
"I'm not quiet anymore."
Security arrived at the doorway, 2 officers drawn by the alert Marcus had triggered on his tablet before entering the OR. Their presence shifted the gravity of the room instantly. My husband's straightened spine rigid, attempting to reclaim authority he no longer had. There's been a misunderstanding, he started, but Marcus cut him off with calm brutality. There hasn't. He handed the audit packet to the lead officer. These records contain direct evidence of falsification, forged timestamps, unauthorized access, and intent to stage a medical event under fraudulent documentation. The officer scanned the top pages, then looked up. Dr. Hale, I'm going to need you to step away from the table. My husband didn't move. He didn't blink. He stared at me. Only me. And in his stare, I saw the truth he had worked so hard to bury. He never expected to lose control. He never expected me to outpace him. He never expected his narrative to break. I stepped forward before fear could root me in place. My voice came out softer than I intended, but steady. It's over. His throat tightened. You ruined everything. No. I said. You did. For the first time, the veneer shattered. His face twisted in something between fury, disbelief, and a desperate edge of collapse resentment I had never seen before. One of the officers stepped closer. Doctor, step away from the table. He exhaled shakily. Then slowly, stiffly, he lifted his hands. Not in surrender, in defiance. But it didn't matter anymore. They took him by the arms, guiding him back from the sterile field he'd prepared with such obsessive precision, and as he moved, the discarded glove rolled slightly across the floor, a small, pathetic remnant of a plan built on lies. As he was escorted toward the hallway, he turned his head one last time, locking eyes with me. This isn't the end, he said quietly. You don't know everything. A tremor ran through me, but I didn't look away. I know enough. He disappeared through the doors, flanked by security. The silence that followed felt entirely different from the silences that had been haunting me for days, no longer a threat, no longer a warning. A release, a rupture, a beginning. Emma inhaled shakily, tears forming. Marcus lowered his shoulders, finally allowing himself to breathe. My gaze drifted to the discarded glove on the floor, the final object of the deception, the last misplaced artifact of his control. For the first time since the nightmare began, the silence didn't frighten me. Silence finally aligned with truth. The hospital feels unfamiliar in the hours after everything collapses, as if the walls themselves have shifted, shedding the weight of the secrets they've held too long. I walk the quiet back corridor near sterile storage, with slow, deliberate steps, the echo of my shoes softened by the late-night hush. I'm back in the present tense now, the moment where aftermath becomes reality, and the whole place breathes differently without his shadow inside it. A refrigerator hums steadily in the supply alcove to my left, its vibration low and constant, grounding me more than I expect. The fridge hum is just background noise on any other night, but tonight it feels like a pulse, something steady to counter the quake that has been living beneath my ribs for days. I pause beside it, resting my fingers on the metal door, letting that quiet vibration travel through my hand, reminding me I'm still here, still standing, still breathing air that doesn't belong to his narrative. The OR wing behind me sits dark now, sealed for investigation. The stage table dismantled the altered logs, secured every piece of evidence, finally pried out of the places he tried to bury it. The air carries a cool sterility, clean in a way that feels symbolic, as if the building has been rinsed of what he meant to do. I'm not used to this kind of quiet, an honest quiet, rather than the suffocating kind he crafted with manipulated logs and missing minutes. Silence finally aligns with truth. The thought threads through me with a strange calm I don't fully trust yet. Night shift staff move gently around the corners of my vision, avoiding loud sounds, as if the whole hospital is trying not to disturb the fragile equilibrium settling in the wake of his removal. Some glance at me with sympathy, some with worry, some with the uneasy recognition that they witnessed something tonight they'll never forget. Marcus approaches slowly from the far end of the hall, his posture less rigid than before, though exhaustion drags at the edges of his expression. He stops a few feet from me, folding his arms gently across his chest. "Security escorted him out of the building," he says quietly. "Administration is freezing all his access and beginning the formal review. They'll alert his licensing board within the hour." I nod, my voice caught somewhere between relief and tremor. "It's real now," I manage. "All of it. It's finally real." "It was always real," he replies softly. "It just wasn't visible." I take a slow breath. The fridge hums steady beneath my hand, a reminder that the world hasn't stopped even though everything inside me feels disassembled. "You saved me," I whisper. Marcus shakes his head. "No. You saved yourself. I just followed the trail you refused to ignore." His words land deeper than he knows. For months, maybe years, I let instinct dissolve under the weight of loyalty. He always knew how to fold the truth into shapes that looked harmless from a distance. That was his talent, his weapon, his way of making sure I never saw the edges until they cut me. But tonight, the edges cut him instead. "Do you want to go home?" Marcus asks gently. The question hits me harder than expected. Home. The word feels foreign, hollow. The house I shared with my husband doesn't feel like safety anymore. It feels like evidence, like a place filled with false calm and rehearsed affection. "Not yet," I whisper. "I just need a minute." Marcus nods and steps back, giving me space without leaving entirely. When he walks toward the main desk, I stay where I am, hand resting against the fridge door, grounding myself in its steady hum. My eyes drift shut. For the first time in days, my lungs expand fully. The world doesn't tilt. The floor doesn't lurch. The silence doesn't feel weaponized. It simply exists. Footsteps approach softly from the right, and when I open my eyes, Emma stands there nervous but steadier than before. Her hands twist once, then still. "I didn't know if I should come," she says, "but I wanted to make sure you were okay." I swallow hard. "Thank you," I whisper, "for everything, for telling me, for not staying quiet." She shakes her head quickly. "I should have said something sooner. You said it when it counted, I tell her. That's what matters." Her eyes glisten, but this time it's not fear, just release. They're interviewing the evening staff, she says. Everyone's telling the same story. He won't be able to twist this. The relief that flows through me is sharp and overwhelming, like a dam finally breaking. "Good," I breathe. He doesn't get to rewrite anything anymore. Emma hesitates, then steps closer. "For what it's worth, you weren't wrong to trust him once. People like him don't show who they really are until you're already standing too close." I nod slowly, the truth of her words settling like a stone in my chest. He almost made me believe it was all in my head, I admit. He counted on that. She meets my gaze with quiet strength. But you figured it out. And you survived it. Survived. The word feels heavier than the others, but also truer. After she leaves, I stay a few moments longer, letting the cool hum of the fridge steady the shaking that still lingers along my spine. When I finally push off the metal door, my legs feel more certain beneath me. I walk the hallway alone, the lights dimming behind me as the hospital settles into its late-night rhythm. Staff move quietly. Machines beep softly in distant rooms, and every single thing feels cleaner, clearer. When I reach the end of the corridor, I stop and look back once. OR3 sits sealed behind frosted glass, but I no longer feel its shadow reaching for me. The story that was being written for me, the one meant to cast me as the problem, the mistake, the liability, it's gone. It died the moment he lost control of the narrative. I turn away from the OR wing with a steady breath, my pulse settling into something that finally feels like my own rhythm. The hospital hums around me, quiet but alive. Honest. And as I walk toward the exit, the silence follows, not heavy, not sharp, not dangerous. Just real. Silence finally aligns with truth.